When America entered World War II, the heroism of the 8th Air Force liberated the skies over Europe. For 25 years, the National Museum of the Mighty 8th Air Force has communicated the values of the greatest generation to the next generation. This Veterans Day, WTOC salutes the Mighty 8th.
The 11th day of the 11th month is a day set aside to honor those that have donned the uniform in service to America. Happy Veterans Day. I'm Mike Seela.
And I'm Dawn Baker. Tonight, WTOC salutes the Mighty 8th Air Force. In World War II, the Mighty 8th saved the world. And here at the National Museum of the Mighty 8th Air Force, they saved their stories.
The museum is a tribute to those that fought for the Mighty 8th Air Force during World War II. Sadly, we are losing more and more of these veterans each day. But those World War II veterans still with us are helping to keep that history alive, to remember all those that have sacrificed and defended our freedom.
This is a fantastic piece of ingenuity just to show you what Americans can do.
At 97 years old, Martin Raber is behind the controls of a functioning Norden bomb site, something he hasn't seen or operated since he was 20 years old.
This to me was an opportunity that I could not say no to.
Raber was a bombardier in World War II, flying 30 bombing missions over Nazi Germany with the 91st Bomb Group. Now, more than 75 years later, at the Mighty 8th Air Force Museum, Raber is giving a demonstration of how the bomb sites worked, which guided B-17s to their precise bombing targets, all while being shot at.
Bombs away.
Dr. Raber remembers all of it. He was actually an instructor in addition to being a lead bombardier.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Try to imagine yourself as an 18 to 20-year-old person sitting up there in the front of this airplane at 30,000 feet trying to operate this complicated piece of equipment. It's just breathtaking what these people did.
It was a time of my life when I did something that I thought was imperative and worthwhile. Now, I'm sitting here, a row of men about my age. We were all pushing 100. They all served like I did.
Today, looking around and speaking with some of his fellow World War II veterans, Raber is overcome with emotion.
Because we did it for the country we lived in, the country we loved. You can't believe how many memories brought back. It was overwhelming to see those other men like myself who went through it, and to realize what a service all of us gave to this country, and hope we don't have to do it again.
When most of us think of museums, we visualize buildings of historic exhibits from long ago. But from the very first day the National Museum of the Mighty 8th opened its doors 25 years ago, they were on a mission to make an impact in the community. Walking around the Mighty 8th Air Force Museum with 10-year-old Caden Deviscovi is easy to see just how much he loves this place.
It's just really fun learning about what different types of planes they used, or what guns they had. For the last 4 years, he has attended the museum summer camp, but nothing beats the lessons he learns walking through this history. It's just an interaction that kind of sparks my mind to feel like I'm there, I'm with these people, and that I want to be there. This museum has become a home away from home for Caden and the many volunteers like Edward Tavares who dedicate their time to share the story of the heroes of the 8th Air Force. The retired Lieutenant Colonel Army pilot came aboard 7 years ago. He says there's no place he'd rather be.
And it continues to improve, and they keep working on it. I think that's what's great about this place. They're always trying to make it better, to support the community better.
The Mighty 8th does that by sponsoring several community programs for adults and students, aviation, girls in aviation, and a Mighty Medicine program.
We talk about how flight and aviation affect the body and the cold temperatures that the men of the 8th had to endure.
Girls and Boy Scouts programs.
And how the home front was so instrumental in helping to win the war, and how important Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts as well were in fulfilling and helping America, make and create everything that was needed.
A Science of Flight tour.
We, of course, give the history of the 8th Air Force, but then we also talk and focus a lot here on our, using our B-17 as a great example of, how do planes fly, the shape of the wing and how important that is in creating the lift and the engines and that sort of thing. We have a wind tunnel that we use and different things, how propellered engines lead to jet engines. It is all about relating modern day to back then to help them understand just a teeny tiny bit of what it was like, 75 to 80 years ago.
The Mighty 8's prized B-17 bomber wasn't always in such pristine condition. When we come back, we'll take a look at the 12-year restoration effort to bring back the city of Savannah.
After the break, I'll take you inside a room that might paint the most accurate picture of the history of the Mighty 8th. Literally.
It took the Mighty 8th Museum 10 years after it opened to secure its signature historical piece. It then took 12 years to achieve the goal of restoring this World War II B-17 bomber to complete combat configuration, a fully volunteer restoration effort that established the museum as experts in the warbird community. As with any classic, there is always work to be done on the Mighty 8th Air Force Museum's signature attraction.
Yeah, the joke around here is it'll never be done. We still have things we have to do to clean, to remove and replace.
And that's after 12 years of almost constant attention on the city of Savannah, a rebuilding project that evolved from basic handiwork to expert craftsmanship, before arriving at the pristine restoration of the museum's World War II B-17 bomber.
In the warbird community, they really have elevated the museum by the work they've done on the city of Savannah. It is recognized again as one of the finest static restorations, and we have other groups that are now undertaking restoration or reconstruction of a B-17 now come to us and reference the work here at the city of Savannah.
This piece of American military history was not restored by historians. It was a fully volunteer effort by hundreds of individuals across 60,000 volunteer hours.
We have our engineers, we have our pilots, we have our military members.
We get some from Hilton Head, some from Skidaway, a lot of retirees.
It's not past tense. The work is ongoing. They're still tinkering and fiddling and working on a couple of major elements of the restoration, and we're just delighted that they still are here and passionate and committed to the city of Savannah.
When the fuselage arrived at the museum in January of 2009, the restoration team quickly realized they couldn't simply go to the local B-17 store for parts. So they educated themselves about the aircraft, inside and out, to be able to create most of what they would need to bring the Flying Fortress back to life.
Pretty much everything, all the bracketry that you see in there, but we've got a retired Gulfstream engineer who pulls the plans for us digitally, and he'll clean them up and then give them to us, who will do the fabrication of sheet metal and making brackets. And we were probably about 7 or 8 years ago, we couldn't buy anything anymore, and that's when we had to shift to just making everything ourselves for the most part.
It was long, hard work that never felt like a job.
And they really are excited about working on a B-17, and we enjoy it. Everybody enjoys it. I don't think you find any individual that says, I don't want to come to work. Everybody loves to come here and play with the airplane.
And many of them have personal connections to World War II, and more particularly to the 8th Air Force. Their sons, their nephews of 8th Air Force veterans, so they poured their heart and soul into the restoration.
And in doing so, established the Mighty 8th Museum on a whole new level, the team becoming the envy of and authority within the very small community that does the work they did so well.
Although there were 13,000 B-17s manufactured during World War II, there are very few remaining, and the city of Savannah is without a doubt the finest static restoration of a B-17 anywhere in the world. So they've come a long way from not knowing what we don't know to being the source, the go-to source for restoration of B-17. So my hat's off to all of them. We owe them a huge debt of gratitude, and we really are forever grateful.
You might not expect to find an art gallery inside a military museum, but as our Sam Bauman found out, this art may give you more insight into the minds of those in the Mighty Eighth than you think, especially when you discover who the artists are.
If you happen to wander into the art gallery at the Mighty Eighth, you may be in for a surprise.
This is a newly hung and completed art exhibit entitled A Brush with Destiny.
Not so surprising because of the art itself, but because of who's behind it.
It actually has 19 artists represented, all of whom flew as part of the 8th Air Force during World War II.
The art chosen by Vivian Rogers Price shows another side of those fighting in the Second World War.
Because you don't really think of men who are trained in combat of also being artists. But they are.
Talented artists at that, painting what they saw.
But this is a watercolor, new crew after their first mission.
Images they couldn't seem to get out of their head, finding a way out onto a canvas.
I think it became a release from some of the tension and the fear that's going to be part of being shot at.
A release and a reminder to all who visit this gallery that those who fought for our freedom were more than just soldiers.
I think you can see how the art gives them a way to basically express their humanity.
Sam Bauman, WTOC News.
A new miniseries may shine a brighter spotlight on the heroism of the Mighty Eighth. Coming up, our Kyle Jordan speaks to an author about how his book could bring their stories to even more people. Heroic stories of the Mighty 8th Air Force are told every day inside the museum in Pooler, but those tales are on the verge of reaching a new audience with help from some heavy hitters in Hollywood. Kyle Jordan explains.
They were teams. They were, to use the cliche, bands of brothers, and there was a lot of unit cohesion, and more than anything else, that kept these guys steadier than they would have been.
Author Donald Miller was drawn to stories of heroism and the unbelievable danger facing members of the Mighty 8th Air Force.
And there's no foxholes in the sky, no place to hide. So it's high drama.
And that brought him to Savannah to craft his story.
They have lots of diaries and personal accounts that flyers have donated to the museum. So it's always been a source for me. I return to the museum regularly.
Now he's watching his book and the stories of the Mighty 8th come to life in a much-anticipated miniseries. Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg are teaming up once again. Following the success of Band of Brothers and then The Pacific, the team is producing the third leg of a World War II trilogy.
That's the thing with Hanks and Spielberg. They really try to get it right. They did this beautifully with The Pacific and Band of Brothers. They have this obligation almost to history, to get it right.
Now serving as a historical consultant on the miniseries, Miller says the exposure for the Mighty 8th Museum could be tremendous.
You come out of a film like that and you say, okay, where can I experience this? Where do you get the full experience of this thing, Is there a spot to go to? And Savannah is that spot. That museum is the place to go.
Miller hopes the series can premiere late next year, 80 years after the activation of the 8th Air Force in Savannah. Kyle Jordan, WTOC News.
Coming up, the National Museum of the Mighty 8th Air Force isn't just about facts, dates, and names. Our Cyria Sandlin shows us a unique collection of art from that time period. Coming up next. When you walk into the Mighty 8th Museum, you immediately step back in time to see what life was like for the brave men and women who served our country. One way to truly grasp all this is through art. Cyria Sandlin shows us the Mighty 8th Museum's one-of-a-kind collection.
Beyond a wall of poppies at the Mighty 8th Museum, you can find original artwork that gives a true glimpse of the soldier experience during World War II. Dr. Vivian Rogers-Price explains.
This is one of my very favorite exhibits with World War II art. It's all by the nationally known aviation artist Clayton Knight, who becomes a preeminent aviation artist and illustrator during the 1930s, but he also has a personal background in aviation.
Knight was a bomber pilot in World War I. After being injured in a plane crash, he recovered, then decided to share his gift with the world.
Clayton Knight, because of his expertise and talent as an artist, did a number of sketches. And then when he comes and interviews the Allied leaders and American pilots in England and sketches them.
Those sketches gave the average American a glimpse of the front lines during the beginning of the war.
He utilizes it to, in the end, to inform the American public of the air war in Europe as conducted by the Allied air forces during 1942. You look at his portrait sketches and you feel like you're meeting the person yourself.
And Dr. Rogers-Price says the 25 sketches in this exhibit can teach an invaluable lesson.
If you want to understand where we are today, then you need to be aware of what happened in the past that actually has shaped current day events.
The National Museum of the Mighty Eighth is full of eye-catching exhibits and thought-provoking history. But there's a hidden treasure in the museum you may not know about. Our Sam Bauman explains, coming up. It's part of the National Museum of the Mighty Eighth that many people don't even know about. You've probably walked past it without even realizing it was there. But as our Sam Bauman found out, this hidden gem may hold the most valuable possessions the museum has to offer.
On the second floor, beyond the planes, above the exhibits, is a room you may have never noticed.
The Roger Freeman Research Center.
And inside this room is where the stories of the mighty 8th Air Force truly come to life. The keeper of those stories, Vivian Rogers-Price.
I'm pretty passionate about things here.
Vivian has been with the mighty 8th for 22 years, and during that time, she's collected a fair share of stories.
He gets 5 kills on one day, so he's an ace in a day.
Stories of valor, stories of survival.
A piece of flak that came into the airplane just as he bent down, and so it missed him.
Stories of the war written by those who lived it.
Each one was trying to help hold the other up because they knew what would happen if they fell.
A snapshot of their lives preserved through their words.
He writes to his beloved wife, Ruth. Then he tells her that he's recently dined with Winston Churchill.
Why would you say this is important?
Because it's the best way to meet the people involved when they're no longer living.
See, Vivian was lucky enough to meet many of these men and women for herself, which might explain some of her passion.
And I decided that the world really, truly shouldn't forget what they did.
What they did was leave a blueprint.
So that we understand better who we are. To understand where you are, you need to look at what you were before and how you got to the present.
Even though many of these veterans are no longer with us, in their words, we can still find them.
Through what they've given this museum to preserve, you can basically get to know the individual.
An individual who still has a lot to teach us, if we're willing to listen.
I think they can find in the stories that we keep here guidelines for their own life. How do you deal with adversity?
So next time you visit the Mighty 8th, make the Research Center part of your trip. because here is where stories come to life.
I view the holdings in this research center as tremendously important.
And once you hear them for yourselves, well, it's nearly impossible to leave them behind.
Is there stopping this for you? Is there a time when you hang it up and say, and walk away from this?
I haven't figured that out.
It feels like it's part of you.
Yeah, it became part of me.
With photographer Dante Lee, Sam Bauman, WTOC News.
The National Museum of the Mighty 8th Air Force preserves the stories that must be told. Stories of Americans in the 8th Air Force that faced impossible odds in the fight against the unthinkable and triumphed. The museum is located on Bourne Avenue off of Highway 80 in Pooler. Happy Veterans Day, and thank you for your service from all of us here at WTOC.